Awaken your spirit chosen ones. When one person finally tells the truth out loud, every lie in the room starts sweating. Not arguing, not shouting, not threatening. Just one calm, steady voice saying, "No, that's not what really happened." And suddenly, everybody's nervous. That's how you know something real just got exposed. Because here's a fact most people never talk about. Human beings don't actually fear conflict. They fear exposure. Psychologists have proven that people will go to extreme lengths to protect their self-image, even when they know they're wrong. Not because they're evil, because admitting the truth feels like ego death. It feels like their identity cracking open. So when you walked in and started naming things exactly how they are, no sugarcoating, no fake politeness, no pretending, you didn't just speak up, you disrupted their entire psychological safety net. And now, they're spiraling. Not laughing, not mocking, not playing it cool like before. Spiraling. It's almost ironic. Back then, when you stayed quiet, they called you slow. When you observed, they called you soft. When you kept your peace, they thought you didn't notice anything. Meanwhile, you were just collecting receipts like a quiet accountant of reality. You weren't confused, you were calculating. And the day you finally opened your mouth and said, "Enough, here's what actually happened," you didn't yell, you didn't curse, you didn't even try to be dramatic. You just told the truth, point blank. And for some reason, that hit harder than any insult ever could. Because insults can be debated. Truth just sits there like, nope, this is what it is. It's almost funny when you think about it. People who lied for years suddenly develop chest pain when facts show up. People who manipulated everybody become philosophers overnight talking about why you're being harsh. People who swore they didn't care about you are now losing sleep over what you said. All because you stopped pretending. That's the part nobody prepares you for. Nobody tells you that when you become honest, really honest, you won't look aggressive, you'll look calm. And that calmness will disturb people more than anger ever could. Because anger, they can fight. But certainty makes people panic. And that's exactly where you are now. Not louder, not meaner, not trying to prove anything, just clear, crystal clear. And clarity has a funny side effect. It exposes everything that was hiding in the dark. So now the same people who once underestimated you are tripping over their own excuses, rewriting stories, whispering behind your back, scrambling to save face. Because deep down, they know something they'll never admit out loud. You didn't attack them. You simply told the truth they hoped you'd never figure out. And once that kind of truth enters the room, there's no going back to pretending. Let's talk about why they're spiraling, and why you didn't even have to try that hard to shake their entire world. Number one, you didn't attack them. You removed their hiding place. People keep saying you came for them, or that you were being harsh, but that's not what really happened. You didn't swing first. You didn't insult anybody. You didn't plot revenge. All you did was stop pretending. And that tiny shift, that simple refusal to play along, is what shook everything. Because most people don't live in truth the way they claim they do. They live in carefully built hiding places, little excuses they repeat so they can sleep at night, little lies they tell themselves so they don't feel guilty, little stories where they're always the good guy and never the problem. Those lies become their shelter, their emotional house, their protection from reality. And you walked in and opened the windows. Not loudly, not violently, just calmly. You said, "No, that's not what happened. This is what happened." Suddenly the air changed. Now they can't hide behind, "You misunderstood me." They can't hide behind, "It wasn't that serious." They can't hide behind, "You're too sensitive." Because you remembered everything. Dates, actions, patterns, tone, energy, the full picture. You spoke with precision. And precision is terrifying to someone who survives on vagueness. The truth cornered them without you even raising your voice. That's why they look so bothered. It's not because you hurt them. It's because you left them nowhere to run. When excuses stop working, people feel exposed, almost naked, and most folks would rather fight you than face themselves. So they say you're doing too much. They say you're dramatic. They say you're cold. But what they really mean is, you took away the comfortable lie I was living in. You didn't destroy them. You removed the mask. And the wild part is, if they had just owned their behavior, none of this would feel so heavy. But accountability feels heavier than any insult ever could. So now they're spiraling, not because you attacked, but because for the first time, they have to stand in the open with nowhere left to hide. Number 2, your clarity forced them to meet themselves, and they hate what they saw. Most people think they want honesty, but what they really want is comfort. They want soft truths, half-truths, stories that protect their ego. They don't actually want to look directly at who they are. They just want to feel okay about who they think they are. You ruined that comfort without even trying. The way you speak is different. You don't twist things. You don't exaggerate. You don't soften the blow just to keep everyone smiling. You say things plain and straight, clean, no emotional perfume on it. Just facts, just patterns, just reality. And reality has a way of stripping people down. When you told them exactly what they did, not angrily, not dramatically, just clearly, it forced them into a moment they spend their whole lives avoiding, a moment where they had to actually look at themselves without excuses. That's brutal, because it's easy to call yourself a good person when nobody is pointing out your contradictions. It's easy to feel innocent when nobody is connecting the dots. But when you calmly lay it all out, you said this, then you did that, and this is the result. There's nowhere to hide. No smoke, no confusion, no escape route, just them and their reflection. And what they saw wasn't flattering. They saw the manipulation they swore they didn't use. They saw the jealousy they pretended wasn't there. They saw the laziness, the envy, the selfishness they always blamed on other people. That kind of clarity hits harder than any insult ever could. Insults can be ignored, but truth sticks. It follows you home. It sits with you at night. So instead of correcting themselves, they turn on you, because blaming you is easier than rebuilding themselves. Your clarity didn't hurt them because it was cruel. It hurt them because it was accurate. And accuracy forces growth or breakdown. Most people choose breakdown. That's why they're spiraling, not because you attacked them, but because for one uncomfortable second they saw themselves exactly as they are, and they couldn't stand the view. Number 3, you broke the unspoken group contract. Every circle, every group, every friendship has its invisible rules. They're not written down anywhere, but everyone knows them. One of the biggest ones is this: pretend. Pretend nothing is wrong. Pretend mistakes don't matter. Pretend inconvenient truths don't exist. It's a silent agreement that keeps chaos disguised as normal. Everyone participates whether they realize it or not, because it's easier than confrontation. It keeps the peace, it keeps them comfortable, and it keeps the spotlight off themselves. Then you showed up. You didn't whisper, you didn't hint, you didn't politely bend the rules. You simply refused to participate. You refused to nod along. You refused to act like nothing was wrong when everything clearly was. You called things by their real names. You named patterns. You traced lies. You put every inconsistency and manipulation out in the open. And that's when the whole house of cards started shaking. You didn't attack anyone individually, but you shattered the system everyone depended on. People weren't upset because of what you said. They were upset because the group's foundation, the quiet contract that made them all feel safe, no longer existed. You exposed that the collective pretending was not harmless. It was toxic, and they had been living inside it for so long they forgot it wasn't normal. Now they can't just look at each other and keep the lie going. They can't pretend it's business as usual. Every excuse, every justification, every carefully rehearsed story is suddenly irrelevant. The group can't protect them anymore because the group itself has been exposed. They feel unmoored, unsafe, vulnerable, and they're scrambling because the rules they relied on no longer apply. You didn't make them spiral. The contract did, and your honesty merely pulled the rug from under it. When one person refuses to honor the unspoken rules, everyone else has to confront the truth they've been avoiding. That's why they panic. That's why they lash out. That's why they whisper and scheme and scramble. The safe illusion is gone, and you didn't even raise your voice. You just refused to lie. Number 4, they can't gaslight you anymore. And that terrifies them. There was a time when they could twist your mind without you even noticing. They'd say something hurtful, then swear they never said it. They'd do something shady, then tell you that you were overthinking. They'd flip the story so smoothly that you'd end up apologizing for things they actually did. And the craziest part? You used to question yourself. Maybe I'm tripping. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I remembered it wrong. That doubt was their playground, because gaslighting only works when someone second-guesses their own reality. Once you start doubting your memory, your instincts, your judgment, you become easy to control. They didn't need force, they just needed confusion, and confusion kept you small. But something changed. You stopped arguing emotionally. You stopped trying to convince them. You stopped explaining yourself over and over. Instead, you started trusting what you saw. You started remembering details. You started noticing patterns. You started saying simple sentences like, "No, that's not what happened," and leaving it there. No drama, no meltdown, just certainty. That certainty messed everything up for them. Because now, when they try to rewrite history, you don't panic. You don't scramble to defend yourself. You calmly repeat the facts. And there's nothing scarier to a manipulator than someone who is grounded in reality. They can't hook you emotionally anymore. Their usual tricks don't land. You're crazy doesn't work. You're imagining things doesn't work. You're too sensitive doesn't work. You just look at them like, "Nice try." And suddenly they're the ones stuttering. Because manipulation needs you to react. It needs you confused. It needs you chasing their approval. When you stay steady, their power disappears. They feel it slipping through their fingers. That's why they're frustrated. That's why they call you cold or stubborn. Not because you changed for the worse, but because you became unmovable. You finally trust yourself more than their words. And once that happens, the game is over. They can't control someone who refuses to doubt their own reality. Number 5, you expose the math they didn't want calculated. Some people live like life has no calculator, like nothing adds up, like yesterday disappears just because today showed up. They move reckless, talk reckless, treat people however they feel in the moment, and assume it all just fades away. No record, no totals, no consequences. They really believed that. They thought every lie reset at midnight. Every betrayal expired after a few days. Every disrespect got buried under time. Out of sight, out of mind. But you weren't built like that. While they were moving sloppy, you were keeping count. Not in a bitter way. Not plotting revenge. You were just aware. You remembered what they said. You noticed what they did. You connected behaviors instead of treating each incident like it came out of nowhere. You saw patterns forming while they were still pretending everything was random. That's the difference. They live moment to moment. You see the whole equation. So when you finally spoke, you didn't come with emotions. You came with receipts. You said this 3 times. You did the same thing last year. This isn't a mistake, it's a habit. That kind of precision hits different, because now it's not misunderstanding, it's not bad timing, it's not one little accident, it's a pattern, and patterns are hard to argue with. Suddenly, all their excuses collapse. They can't sweet-talk their way out. They can't charm you. They can't distract you with jokes or drama. The numbers don't lie. The math is sitting there, cold and undeniable. Action plus action plus action equals consequence. And they hate that, because for the first time, they have to face the total, the full cost of everything they thought nobody noticed. It's like a bill they never expected showing up all at once. You didn't threaten them. You just showed them the sum. And people who live carelessly always panic when someone finally does the math. Not because you're cruel, but because you proved nothing they did was forgotten. Number 6. You removed their ability to play victim. Some people survive by pretending the world is against them. Every mistake they make, every hurt they cause, every selfish move is framed as something someone else forced them into. They've built a whole identity around it. They don't just tell stories, they perform them. They rehearse their lines, polish their excuses, and wait for the applause of sympathy. Being a victim isn't just a narrative for them, it's currency. It buys attention, influence, and protection. And for years, it worked perfectly, because nobody challenged it. Then you came along. You didn't fight them. You didn't attack them. You didn't call them names. You just told the facts. You laid out the events exactly as they happened, connecting actions to consequences, words to results, patterns to outcomes. And suddenly, their carefully crafted victim story didn't add up. Every inconsistency, every lie, every excuse was exposed. The narrative they relied on to manipulate perception, guilt, and control started crumbling. Now they're scrambling. They can't claim innocence. They can't point fingers without being caught in their own contradictions. Every attempt to cry foul is met with calm truth. Every manipulative tear is met with accuracy and precision. And that terrifies them more than confrontation ever could. You didn't humiliate them. You didn't shame them. You didn't try to take them down. You simply refused to participate in their performance. You refused to hand them the applause they depended on. And without that, the victim mask doesn't work. They are forced to see themselves clearly, and the truth of their actions stares back at them, unblurred and undeniable. That's why they spiral. Because for the first time, their safety net is gone. Their excuses are useless. Their manipulation fails, and the world doesn't owe them sympathy anymore. You didn't remove them from the story. They removed themselves the moment they relied on lies instead of accountability. You simply held up the mirror they avoided for so long, and now the only thing they can do is scramble to deal with the reality they refuse to see. Number 7. You didn't raise your voice, you raised the standard. Most people expect confrontation to come with noise, yelling, drama, tears, threats, outbursts. They believe truth only lands when it's loud, messy, and aggressive. They are comfortable with chaos because it gives them a script. They argue, they resist, they deflect, and then everything goes back to normal. That's the rhythm they know. But you didn't play by that rhythm. You didn't scream, you didn't stomp your feet, you didn't plead for them to understand. You simply acted with integrity, consistency, and precision. You spoke calmly, firmly, and unapologetically. Your words were measured, your boundaries unshakable, your actions aligned with your principles. And in that moment, something invisible happened. You shifted the bar. Now, their old excuses don't work. Their manipulations don't land. Their casual disrespect doesn't fly. They can't shrug anything off because the standard they used to rely on has moved. You didn't just say what was right, you embodied it. Your presence, your composure, your refusal to tolerate nonsense set a benchmark they weren't ready for. And that terrifies them more than anger ever could. They see that you don't need to fight to be heard. You don't need to perform to be respected. You don't need to beg to be taken seriously. That kind of strength disrupts their comfort zone. It exposes the laziness, the entitlement, the shortcuts they've been taking. Suddenly, everything they relied on to maintain control feels inadequate. You didn't need to prove yourself. You simply refused to lower yourself to their level. That alone forced them to confront their behavior, their habits, and their lack of discipline. And most people would rather spiral, lie, or deflect than face a standard they know they can't meet. Because raising the standard isn't about being loud, it's about being untouchable in principle. And when one person refuses to lower their expectations, everyone else in the room suddenly has to deal with the reality they've been avoiding. That's why they're spiraling. That's why they're panicking. Not because you attacked, not because you're dramatic, simply because you refuse to settle for anything less than the truth. Number 8. They realize you were observing the whole time. The thing that rattles people the most isn't what you said. It's that they finally understand you were paying attention all along. While they were performing, pretending, manipulating, and assuming you were oblivious, you were quietly taking notes. Not in a dramatic way, not to prove a point immediately, but simply because you were aware. You noticed patterns, you noticed repetitions, you noticed the little things that reveal someone's true character over time. Every inconsistency, every excuse, every half-truth, they all went on your mental ledger. And then one day, you spoke. Not emotionally, not explosively, just clearly, calmly, and with precision. And suddenly the whole performance they thought they were running was exposed. They realize now that nothing slipped by you. Every lie, every manipulation, every act they assumed was invisible is on the table. And the scary part for them? You didn't even need to confront them until the moment it mattered. You didn't need to make noise to be powerful. You just observed. That quiet observation is terrifying, because it forces accountability without you lifting a finger for years. People assume they can fool others and get away with it, but when the quiet one finally speaks, it hits harder than any argument ever could. They start connecting dots they didn't know you were keeping track of. Every casual comment they made in passing, every half-hearted apology, every attempt to gaslight, they all come back into focus, and they realize someone has been calculating the full picture the whole time. You weren't impatient, you weren't reactive, and you weren't impulsive. You waited, you watched, you let them reveal themselves fully, and now that the reveal is complete, the truth lands like a thunderclap. That's why they're spiraling. It's not anger, it's not revenge. It's the realization that they can't sneak anything past you. They can't rewrite history. They can't hide behind excuses anymore. The observer has spoken, and observation, when precise and patient, is more devastating than confrontation. It's calm, it's accurate, and it leaves no escape. Number 9. Your detachment exposed their emotional dependence. Most people live under the assumption that everyone needs them. They build their self-worth around the idea that without their presence, influence, or approval, nothing would function. They operate as if the world revolves around their attention, as if validation from others is proof of their importance. They manipulate, guilt, or dramatize, fully confident that people will bend, apologize, or adjust just to keep the peace. That illusion lasts until someone refuses to play the game. You didn't get angry. You didn't argue. You didn't beg for them to notice or approve of you. You simply became detached. Your presence was steady, your emotions self-contained, your focus unshakable. You didn't need them to feel whole, to feel validated, or to feel safe. And that simple refusal to be dependent on their approval shattered everything they relied on. They began noticing it immediately. You weren't reacting the way they expected. You weren't chasing after their validation. You weren't desperate to be liked, forgiven, or accommodated. And suddenly, they realized the uncomfortable truth. Their sense of control depended entirely on your dependence, and your independence had removed it. It's a strange kind of power, not the kind you take by force, but the kind you demonstrate by simply existing outside their expectations. Detachment doesn't humiliate them directly, but it forces them to confront how much of their identity relies on manipulating, controlling, or emotionally tethering others. They scramble because the energy they use to leverage over you no longer works. Their tactics are useless, their emotional hooks are ineffective, and most importantly, the false sense of importance they built around your reactions is gone. That's why they spiral. It isn't fear of confrontation, it isn't anger at you personally, it's the shocking realization that someone they assumed they could control doesn't need them at all. Your detachment didn't make them powerless, it revealed the truth. They were dependent, and you never were. That imbalance, when fully realized, is enough to unravel even the most confident manipulators. Number 10. You force them out of fantasy and into consequence. Some people live like the world owes them a story where they are always justified, always right, always innocent. They move through life expecting mistakes to be forgiven, lies to be overlooked, and selfishness to be excused. Their entire existence depends on pretending that actions don't have real outcomes, that consequences are optional, and that reality bends to their excuses. And as long as nobody calls them out, that fantasy survives, untouched and comfortable. Then you came along. You didn't plead, you didn't exaggerate, you didn't twist the narrative to make it dramatic. You simply told the truth and laid out the facts with clarity. You connected actions to results. You pointed out patterns. You named behaviors and held them accountable for them. In doing so, you pulled them out of the world they were living in, a world where they could avoid responsibility, and dropped them into the reality they had been ignoring. That kind of confrontation doesn't feel like confrontation. It feels like awakening. And for someone who has been living in fantasy, awakening feels brutal. They suddenly see the consequences they swore would never touch them. They feel the weight of every lie, every shortcut, every manipulation. Their excuses don't work. Their charm doesn't work. Their carefully constructed illusions shatter because you refuse to play along. And that's terrifying, because consequences are heavy, unavoidable, and impartial. You didn't punish them. You didn't threaten them. You just reminded them that the world isn't obligated to ignore reality and that every action has a reaction. And for people who have spent years pretending otherwise, that truth is explosive. That's why they spiral. It's not about you being harsh. It's not about you being dramatic. It's about them finally realizing that life doesn't bend to cover their mistakes. You didn't push them into consequence. They were already in it. You just refused to keep pretending it wasn't there. And that refusal is what shakes them to the core. Number 11. You made manipulation inefficient. For years, they relied on the fact that people could be manipulated. It was simple. Confusion, emotional reactions, guilt, or charm could get them what they wanted. They had mastered the art of pushing buttons, twisting words, and bending perception until everyone else did the work for them. Life was easy when their targets reacted exactly as expected, when excuses and tears produced results without effort. That's the rhythm they thrived on. Then you stepped in. You didn't argue, you didn't beg, you didn't plead or explain yourself endlessly. You refused to react in the ways they counted on. Calm, steady, and measured, you became someone whose energy and response couldn't be exploited. Their usual tactics, gaslighting, guilt trips, emotional drama, simply failed. Every trick that once guaranteed control hit a wall because you weren't a participant anymore. You weren't providing the chaos or confusion that gave them leverage, and that inefficiency terrifies them. Manipulation depends on ease. When someone can no longer bend or twist reality to suit them effortlessly, they panic. They are forced to confront the fact that control requires honesty, accountability, and effort, things they never practiced. You didn't attack. You didn't expose them publicly. You didn't make a scene. You just became difficult to exploit, and suddenly the power they relied on vanished. They scramble because their old methods are useless. They panic because they thought their influence was permanent. And they hate that the imbalance wasn't created by aggression. It was created by your refusal to participate in their games. This is why they spiral. Not because you tried to overpower them, but because the system they depended on to control situations and people collapsed the moment you stopped being a target. They realize that without your reaction, without your emotional vulnerability, they are powerless to steer the narrative. And most manipulators, when faced with this, have no backup plan. Their inefficiency now mirrors their exposure, and they have nowhere left to hide. You didn't make their tactics fail by attacking. They failed because you stopped being manipulable. And for them, that's far worse than confrontation. Number 12, your presence exposes effort levels. Some people live in the comfort of coasting. They rely on appearances, excuses, and shortcuts to get through life. They talk a big game, act confident, and assume no one is paying attention to what's really happening behind the scenes. They measure success by how little effort they need to get validation or recognition, and they depend on others not noticing the difference between talking and doing. That strategy works until someone who actually puts in the work steps into their orbit. Your presence alone is a disruption. You don't need to shout, brag, or prove yourself. Simply by showing up fully prepared, disciplined, and consistent, you highlight the gap between your effort and theirs. Every small detail you handle with precision, every promise you keep, every habit you stick to silently underscores their lack of commitment. They don't even have to compare consciously. They feel it. There's an unspoken discomfort in being around someone whose standards are higher, not because they're flashy, but because they simply honor their own process. This subtle exposure terrifies them. It's not dramatic. It's not confrontational. It's the quiet, undeniable truth that while they are coasting, you are building. While they are avoiding responsibility, you are embracing it. Every meeting, every interaction, every situation becomes a mirror reflecting their shortcuts, their procrastination, and their lack of discipline. And the worst part for them? You don't need to comment on it. You don't need to point it out. Your consistent presence is evidence enough. That's why they spiral. They scramble to justify laziness and half-effort because the truth is staring them in the face. They're being exposed without you saying a word. They can't accuse you of attacking them because you're not. You're simply living in a way they can't match. And that realization, the raw awareness of their own complacency in comparison to your dedication, triggers panic, envy, and frustration. Your presence doesn't just influence outcomes, it forces them to confront their own effort levels, and that confrontation, though silent, is often more unsettling than any direct criticism. It's a spotlight on truth, and some people can't handle being illuminated. Number 13, you didn't seek revenge, you simply stopped protecting them. For years you covered for them. You smoothed over their mistakes, excused their behavior, and cleaned up the messes they left behind. You didn't do it to be a martyr or to gain favor. You did it because you valued peace, integrity, or maybe because you believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Your silence and patience acted as a shield, hiding their flaws from the world and letting them operate without facing the consequences of their own actions. Then something shifted. You didn't launch attacks. You didn't plot payback. You didn't even raise your voice. You simply stopped protecting them. The safety net that had existed for years your patience, your tolerance, your willingness to cover for them, was gone. Suddenly, every mistake, every lie, every manipulation they had relied on you to hide was visible. Your absence of defense exposed them fully, and that's what terrifies them. They aren't upset because you attacked them. They're upset because the world finally sees them as they truly are. They thought they could rely on your protection forever. They thought their actions would never reach the consequences they deserved. They counted on you to be the buffer, the one who would make excuses, explain away behavior, or take responsibility for what was theirs. But once you withdrew that cover, the full weight of reality hit. Every lie, every manipulation, every broken promise came to light, and they couldn't do anything about it. It's not revenge, it's accountability delivered silently. And people hate accountability when it's unexpected. They scramble to hide, spin stories, or gaslight, but nothing works because the shield they depended on, the one you were providing, no longer exists. Your removal of protection forced them to face themselves, to stand in their own truth, and to confront the consequences of what they had done all along. That's why they spiral. They panic, they lash out, they whisper behind your back, and they search for ways to regain control. But the reality is clear. You didn't attack them. You simply stopped saving them from themselves, and that alone was enough to shake their world. Number 14. The truth coming from you hits harder because they know you're not malicious. Most people can dismiss criticism if they think it comes from spite, jealousy, or anger. They can argue, push back, or even laugh it off if they believe the person speaking has a personal agenda. But when truth comes from someone calm, measured, and unshakably fair, it's impossible to ignore. That's why your words land like a hammer. You don't have to yell, you don't have to dramatize, you don't have to exaggerate, you simply state what is. The fact that you are not attacking, that you are not seeking revenge, makes it sting all the more because it cannot be argued away. They feel it immediately. Every lie they've told, every excuse they've made, every manipulation they've relied on suddenly comes into full view. Your voice carries the weight of observation, patience, and consistency, and because there is no malice behind it, there is nowhere for them to hide. They can't accuse you of bias or claim that you're just reacting emotionally. They know you are simply speaking reality, and reality has a way of cutting deeper than any insult ever could. It unsettles them because they have no defense. No amount of spinning or gaslighting can touch someone who isn't reacting with fear, guilt, or anger. Your calm truth forces them to face facts they have spent years avoiding. It leaves them exposed, not because you wanted to harm them, but because they can no longer hide behind illusions. That's why they spiral. It's not the tone, the volume, or the delivery. They spiral because the message is undeniable, and they know it. They realize the accountability they've dodged for so long is finally unavoidable. And because the source of the truth isn't malicious, it carries an authority that no lie or excuse can counter. Your honesty becomes a mirror they can't break, and the reality reflected back at them is too powerful to ignore. They panic, they stumble, and they scramble because the truth is coming from someone who doesn't wish them harm, and that makes it impossible to escape. At the end of the day, the reason they're spiraling isn't because you attacked, lashed out, or tried to hurt anyone. It's because you refused to play their game. You refused to lie, to excuse, to shield, or to lower your standards for their comfort. You spoke truth. You held your ground. You observed without losing your peace. You stopped covering for them, stopped participating in manipulation, and stopped pretending that fantasy could replace accountability. Every move you made exposed what they relied on most: their illusions, their shortcuts, their victim narratives, and their false sense of control. Your calm presence, unwavering clarity, and refusal to be manipulated revealed realities they've been avoiding their entire lives. You didn't have to raise your voice or make a scene. You simply existed with honesty, integrity, and self-respect, and that alone shattered the safety nets they had taken for granted. You showed them that truth is stronger than chaos, that accountability cannot be ignored, and that independence makes emotional dependence painfully obvious. Every excuse, every lie, every manipulation they relied on fell apart because you refused to bend, to excuse, or to participate. The brilliance of what you did is this: you didn't need revenge. You didn't need aggression. You didn't need to prove anything. All you did was live fully, speak clearly, and act consistently with reality. That kind of strength is disarming. It's undeniable. It's unshakable. And it leaves people exposed in ways no confrontation ever could. They're spiraling not because of you. They're spiraling because you revealed the truth about their actions, and truth has a way of hitting harder than anything else. So own it. This is your moment. You didn't break, you didn't fold, you didn't compromise your clarity. You became the mirror they couldn't hide from. And in that mirror their illusions crumble, while your integrity stands tall. If this message hit you, make sure you don't just watch in silence. Subscribe to the channel to stay on this journey, like the video to show your support, comment below to share your own experiences, and share this with someone who needs to understand the power of truth. Your clarity, your calm, and your strength aren't just lessons. They're a movement. Be part of it. Stay awakened, chosen ones.